Welcome to session 2 of my course, Tent Maker. In this course, we're going to focus on the idea of stewardship. And so in session 1, we talked about how to use the wealth that God gives us to lead people, to love people, to care for people. And now we're going to talk about this idea of stewardship. Really, how do we first put this first domino on the table about how to even go about gaining wealth and this biblical foundation for it. And so we're going to look at a story that you know called the parable of the talents. And it's Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. And I'm going to read the entire passage for us because I want you to see what happens with the master and his servants. And then we'll pull our definition of stewardship out of this parable. Verse 14 of chapter 25 says, "For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability." This is important here to think about. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once, and he traded with them. And he made 5 talents more. So now this guy's got 10 talents. So also he had the one who had 2 talents went and he made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug it in the ground, and he hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with him. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, "Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." And he also who had 2 talents came forward, saying, "Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 more talents." His master said also to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. I will set you over much. You have been faithful over a little. Enter into the joy of your master." He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours." But his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was mine own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken from him. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And so this is an important parable for us as we continue to anchor this principle of tent making in Scripture. First of all, I want to talk about the master's money. I want you to see in all of this that God owns everything. God owns everything that you currently have right now, and God owns everything that he will entrust to you one day. So as you go about building wealth as followers of Jesus, we know that this wealth, even though that we're going to leave to our children's children, again, Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22, will one day be left to them, but we have to always think about it as entrusted to us by the master first. God owns all. God will provide all. The first and the second servants here believed this. The third servant lived, however, with a mindset of fear. And maybe some of you have this mindset, a scarcity mindset. And oftentimes when I'm talking with people who have a mindset of fear when it comes to money or fear when it comes to resources or the scarcity mindset, it often is anchored in their upbringing. Maybe they grew up in more of a a home that didn't have a lot of resources, or their parents worked several jobs, or a single parent home that had multiple jobs, whatever the case may be, and there are many, these types of circumstances also or oftentimes lead to scarcity mindsets when we grow up, when we become adults, and God gives us resources to steward on our own. We never want to get rid of it because maybe one day we might not have it. And this was the third servant's posture when he was given this money by the master. Really, it's a posture of unbelief, I think. It's a posture of unbelief in the Father who owns all things and then freely gives us all things. James, the book of James reminds us of this, right? That all good and perfect gifts come from the Father alone. They come from above. And I think this is the essence also of another story that you've probably heard called the prodigal son, right? The prodigal son story is about a father who has already given his sons everything. Tim Keller says that the story of the prodigal son is a story about God, not about either son. And the story is about a God who freely and lavishly gives all things away to his people. This is what the father does in the story of the prodigal son, and this is what the master does in the parable of the talents. And so in the story of the prodigal son, he gives the younger son everything that is due him, and the younger son spends it all, wastes it all, comes back to him, and if you remember the story, the father runs to the younger son, freely giving him all things. He runs then to the older son who's in the field, who is in his field really of self-righteousness. He's angry that the father gave the younger son his part of inheritance and is still welcoming him back after he lived this lavish lifestyle, the Bible says. And the father goes to both the younger son and welcomes him, goes to the older son and says, hey, remember, everything I have has always been yours. And I think that's the mindset we have to have, and that's the mindset that the first servant and the second servant had here, is that they understood that everything that the Father has is also ours. Everything that the Master has is also theirs. And I think this really is the story of redemption. Before we even talk about stewardship for a second, this is the larger story of redemption and how we view all things, even money, even wealth building, even tent making, must be aligned, I think, under two things. How God is reigning in the world and he's moving history towards his plans. And then secondly, how God is reigning in our hearts. Say that again. How God is reigning in the world and moving history towards his plans. And then secondly, how God is reigning in our hearts and moving us towards participating in his plans. So really, this is the why, right? This is the why of wealth building. Being able to use what we have for his glory, having a mindset of belief that every good and perfect gift actually does come from above. And I think this is the view that we must have in all things. And so when we talk about stewardship, I want you to see that stewardship then is our participation in the redemption of all things with what God has given to us. So really our time, our talents, and our treasures. God's given us limited time on this earth. How do we use that in participation of the redemption of all things? God's given us specific, particular giftings as followers of Jesus to build up the church. How are we using those in the redemption of all things? And then also God's given to us, each according to his own, according to here the parable of the talents, according to his own ability, to go out and turn what God has been given to him into more for participation in the redemption of all things. So more specifically, it is how we use the resources that God has given to us to participate in God's mission. how we use our time, talents, and treasures. And here's how I would define stewardship. Stewardship, more specifically then, is how we live in such a way where we turn what God has given to us by God into more for God's glory. I think this is the biblical argument for this topic of tent making, the biblical argument for wealth building, the biblical argument for whatever your job is, however old you are, whatever stage of life you might find yourself in, whatever title you might have today. This is the biblical argument for you sitting in the seat of the prudent man of Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. And I think this leads us then not to just this idea of stewardship, of turning what we have. Maybe you have $1 to your name. The question from me to you is, let's now put a plan to turn that into $10. And then let's put a plan to turn the $10 into $100, and so on, as the servants here in the parable of the talents, the servant 1 and servant 2, did for the master. And so when we talk about this idea of flourishing, it's really living how God designed us to live, how he created us to live. And so I think whatever title you have, whatever job you have today, or whatever season of life you're in, God designed us to sit in the seat of the prudent man. God designed us to be that prudent man who uses what we have, who turns it into more, and then leaves it for his children's children. This is Philippians chapter 1, verse 21, right? For me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. And I think this is the tension of the Christian life. Death is gain because we get Jesus, but if we are to live in such a way where we bring great glory to Christ. It is to live a life that is focused on stewarding what God has given to you, everything that he has given to you, that has been entrusted to you to play your part in the story of redemption. Using your resources, your time, your talents, your treasures, turning them into more for God's glory, to love others, to leave an inheritance, to leave a legacy, and as we talked about, for the fruit of the gift. But to do that, to turn $1 into $10, turn $10 into $100, to turn $100 into a lifetime of building wealth for God's glory, to have something of financial means to leave to your children's children one day, you have to have a plan. And that's what the rest of this course will do for you.